gamers and goblins, my name is Cara and welcome to the Homeworld 3 series sponsored by Gearbox. If you want to play Homeworld 3 yourself, you can use my link in the description, buy it on Steam or the Epic Game Store, and play it today. But only if you're a dork like me. Today we're doing a basic battle guide for the War Games mode. Big new addition to Homeworld 3. It lets you play cooperatively with other players in a sort of rogue-like mode where your ships, the health of your capital ship and everything, carry on from one region to a next. So once you do one set of objectives, then you move on to the next arena and then to the next arena. And you can keep on doing that and unlocking abilities and level ups as you fight in progressively more and more challenging arenas. It can be pretty fun, and I'm sure it's more fun with friends. I don't have any friends, so all of my footage is me on my own. Sad. It's a pretty fun game mode. This guide is for anyone who wants to get into the War Games mode, whether you're playing single player or cooperatively. The objectives can kind of vary from salvaging some ships here and there to doing other things like fighting certain capital ships or whatever. And then as soon as you're done with your objectives and you're ready to leave the arena and move on to the next, you can just press the button and you can stay there for as long as you want to too, but you will have enemies continuously fighting you still and still spawning around the arena. So it's a pretty interesting game mode. You gotta move quickly, do your objectives quickly, or else you'll just be fighting an infinite amount of units for no reason at all. First things first, you probably want to familiarize yourself with the basic controls. If you are a beginner, I would invite you to watch my earlier videos about everything you need to know to get started playing Homeworld 3 or the complete beginner's tutorial. A lot of the concepts carry over here. Importantly, you're not playing as the mothership you do in the campaign. You are playing as a carrier. Now, it's still pretty good. You can still dock units to it and heal. It still has some weapons on it, but it's definitely not as good as the mothership. If you want to send it to certain places, it can take more damage on its own. It's not quite as much of a tank or quite as fast as the mothership. It can still serve a lot of the same basic functions. You still research and build units through it. It's your hub of operations for everything. So you can think of it like your mothership. It's just not as good. First of all, like any game in Homeworld, really important, first things first, is to gather resources so that you can have resource credits to spend on researching technology, researching upgrades. Every time you play War Games, it's kind of like a new game, so you do sort of need to like research a lot of old ships you might have unlocked in the campaign mode or whatever. So it's kind of a fun challenge to start out with a more basic fleet before you can start unlocking the better ships and getting stronger and stronger as you go through more and more arenas to fight more and more enemies. What I would recommend for resource management is the same as all other tips and tricks and guides videos I've made. I would put them into their own control group so that you have the max number of resource collection units, and you really do want the maximum number of them so that you can basically just select them in their control group and then press H to have them go automatically collect units. Now, this can kind of be detrimental sometimes in the War Games mode because enemy armies will literally just spawn anywhere and everywhere, so it can lead to a situation where all of your resource collectors are getting destroyed out of nowhere. I would say if you want to micro it, you should probably send off a handful of units to go protect them for whatever they're doing. Just put them in guard mode and forget about them and then still do the same thing. If you're like me and you don't want to micro it that hard, it's not that difficult to build more resource collection ships, but it can slow you down a lot, so just be careful about that. The game gives you a little bit of time at the beginning to gather resources before more units start coming your way and swarming you. So if you want to, you can even send your capital ship and the rest of your army along with them to wherever they're starting to collect resources from. It's a pretty good way just to make sure that you get some resources right at the start of the game. But then yeah, after the game gives you some time to collect your resources, to build up your army a little bit more from either if it's a new game or if it's like the last arena that you're coming from. It gives you a bit of a breather before the real fighting and action starts. As the war game progresses, it'll give you certain objectives, whether that's to defeat a certain carrier, whether that's to salvage certain ships, or whatever the case might be. Basically, fly around and do those objectives while constantly fending off attacks. If you see these incursion points, that's basically where they spawn on the map. If your objective doesn't need you to go through one of those incursion points, I would recommend just just avoiding them for the most part. You will still get found and harassed, but it won't be as bad because you won't be sitting in their backyard. Since these enemies are constantly spawning, there's really no point in trying to clear out the map or anything before trying to do your objective. If you send off an army somewhere far away from your capital ship or your resource collectors, try to make sure that you're on top of it so that you don't also get ambushed by another force of units coming your way. I have lost a couple of games doing this when I just haven't stayed on top of everything. If you're a little more ADHD like me, I would recommend just keeping things together as much as you can. Like, you don't need to fight the ships off in the distance just because they're there. Like, you can just sort of leave them alone and sort of, if they spot you, then you can fight them. But if they don't spot you, maybe they'll just fly by or hang out wherever they're at. So I just gotta put up with them, I guess. No matter what you do, try not to run out of units or always have a way of getting more. Combat in Homeworld 3 does require a lot more than just sort of throwing units at the enemy. You can just throw a bunch of ships at the enemy, but if you want to do it more strategically, basic tips I would recommend, just like for the campaign. Flanking is really important. If there's any large ships, you can distract them with smaller ships and then ambush them with your larger ships. Focus fire is really powerful. It increases your whole fleet's DPS. If you can get them all to focus their attack power on one stronger ship, especially for capital ships, you should try out your abilities and see if they can help you with certain things. I normally don't use them that often because it's kind of micro-y, but it can help in some certain situations. There's just some trade-offs too. If you're playing with a teammate, you can split up your forces, tackle the same objectives together to get even more firepower, communicate with your teammates, divide roles, and support each other to achieve victory. But I guess if you're playing solo like me, you don't need to worry about that. Sad. Thank you again to Gearbox for sponsoring this series. You can check out Homeworld 3 using my link in the description, and you can buy it on Steam or the Epic Game Store if you want to play it today.